Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Were England right to kick the ball out against New Zealand in that match at the weekend? In this video, I'm going to say why I think upon reflection that it was the correct decision, but a big moment with the game at 25-all. They just scored 3 tries in about 8 minutes. Should they have gone for the victory? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you are new here, do subscribe to the channel as well and drop a like on the video. It makes a massive difference to support that algorithm. All right. Let's get into it. So as I said in the intro, upon reflection, I think that it was the right decision for England. In the video I did immediately after the game on the weekend, I said that I actually thought it was a little bit negative. I didn't particularly like that tactic. You would have heard the crowd on the game, if you watched the game, that there was a lot of booing at Twickenham. I think a lot of people were frustrated by perhaps the negativity. I think it was Lima Sopawanga I saw tweet about that it was such a negative move from England. There's also people who pointed out that Barrett was still in the sin bin. TJ Perenara had gone off. England had the advantage in terms of numbers out there on the pitch. So I can completely understand the reasons for why people would think that it was the wrong decision. Obviously, it's the Autumn Nations series. There's not a trophy at the end of it. You go for the win, don't you? I completely get it. But upon reflection, I think that actually I have changed my mind. I've changed my mind, and I'm going to try and explain why in this video. So first of all, if we look at that moment, England had the momentum, scored a number of tries, got themselves back into the game. Incredible, really, when you consider that they were 19 points down or whatever it was against the All Blacks, had played pretty terribly and had been able to drag themselves back into the game. But then you have the restart. After they kick the conversion and it's 25-all, you have the restart. New Zealand go fairly short. They kick right down the middle of the pitch. England are able to get the ball back. But if you actually look at the setup at that period, because of the amount of men that England had committed to making sure they won the ball back, they were actually outnumbered in that defensive line that New Zealand had. There'd have been a high chance of a turnover. Matteo Reynal, the way he was penalising them all day, was also that, you know, it was advantage really to the defensive team if you go back and watch the game in terms of who was being penalised. So there's a lot of risk there for England. I'm not sure there necessarily was the obvious opportunity for them to run the ball. And so therefore, Marcus Smith at that point doesn't really have much in the way of choice in front of him. He's back in the pocket. They pass it back to him. He did kind of look around just to double check, and then he kicked it into the stands to take the draw. Now, as I've mentioned, the crowd at Twickenham were booing. They weren't particularly happy. If I was part of the crowd in that moment, I'd have probably been doing exactly the same. I'm not saying that I wouldn't. I'm saying that my opinion on this has changed upon reflection, because England have billed this autumn series as, I guess, kind of a mini World Cup in a way. That's the narrative that they've been trying to spin to us anyway. They had Argentina and Japan in their first 2 games, which is their first 2 pool games in France next year. And then they've played New Zealand, and then this coming Saturday, South Africa, which was the semi-final and the final from the 2019 World Cups. They've kind of built it up in that way of this is like a mini World Cup for us. Well, if it's a mini World Cup in that situation, what do you think England do? Do you think they continue to play with it, they push their luck, or do you think they kick it out and they take extra time? And despite the emotion of the moment, despite the momentum that they'd built up, actually it's the decision of the players on the pitch to forget about all that, to put the context of the game and make clear decisions. And so therefore, that's kind of why I'm leaning towards the suggestion that it was a good call from England. They hadn't played that well. They've been able to get themselves back into the game. They take the draw and they can move on. And if it was a World Cup scenario, if it was a knockout game in the World Cup where they could meet New Zealand, I think you take extra time there rather than playing it and maybe giving away a penalty. I can also understand the argument of people that would say, well, at least just try a couple of phases. See if you go anywhere, and if you don't, if you're going backwards or you're not breaking the gain line, then kick it out. I think that's a fair argument as well. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong decision here, actually, in all honesty. I think it's quite a subjective call. But as I say, the more I think about it, the more I reflect upon it, then I think that it was probably the right call from England to kick the ball out, despite the frustration of the fans. And the other thing that, of course, that I've already kind of touched upon is where England are at the moment. They haven't been playing particularly well. They lost to Argentina, what was a terrible game. They then did the job on Japan. And to be fair to them, Japan pushed the All Blacks and not pushed France, but there was a period in the game against France the weekend just gone where actually Japan could have got themselves back into that game. They just weren't quite, the bounce of the ball didn't necessarily fall their way. So given where England are at the moment, the lack of momentum, the poor performances, you take that 10 minutes at the end of the game against New Zealand where they get themselves back into it. They score 3 tries. They have that momentum. You take that into the week building up to South Africa, because if they had conceded a penalty, if they had turned the ball over, if New Zealand had somehow got a foothold and been able to get the victory themselves, the gloss of England's comeback would massively be taken off that result. So I think in terms of building momentum, in terms of moving forward, it was probably the correct call from England. Interestingly, Eddie Jones after the game said that he backed the decision of the players. From what I can gather, the decision was made by the players out on the pitch. I would be really intrigued, I don't think we'll ever know, but exactly who made that decision, because Marcus Smith kicked it out. Henry Slade had his head in his hands. He wanted to keep playing. So who made that decision exactly? Did it come from Owen Farrell, the captain? Did Marcus Smith just make that call? I'd have thought if it was Marcus Smith playing for Harlequins, we'd have seen them go for it. Of course, the context of that would be incredibly different in a Gallagher Premiership game. Stakes aren't quite as high, etc., etc. But even so, that's kind of interesting that he was the guy to kick the ball out. Was it Ben Youngs, the experienced replacement scrum half? So England kick it out. They take the draw. They move on. That's kind of the reason that I feel it was a good decision upon reflection, a frustrating decision. I can completely understand the frustration of the fans at Twickenham, of people watching at home. But if we really take the emotion out of it, take the occasion and all of that out of it, what was the best decision in that moment? What was the best decision if you're in a World Cup quarter-final or a semi-final? And some people might throw it back at me and say, well, it wasn't a World Cup quarter-final or a semi-final. There wasn't that sort of thing at stake. So therefore, they might as well have tried to play it. But I go back to it once again. England have billed this as a mini World Cup. They need to be approaching it as if it was a World Cup, and therefore I think it was the correct decision for them to get that ball out of play and head down the tunnel with the draw. As I said already, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. People in the comments might prove me wrong there. They might suggest that, of course, there's a right answer. It was to keep playing and go for the victory. You don't play for the draw, you play for win. I think that's a completely fair point of view. I can understand why someone would feel that way. But for me, I actually think upon reflection, good decision. Good decision to kick the ball out. They move on now into the game against South Africa this weekend with a draw against New Zealand in a game they didn't play very well. Can they build upon that? Can they get the victory this weekend? In fact, that might go some way in alleviating some of the frustrations of not going for the victory against New Zealand. If they can use that momentum, build upon it and get the victory against South Africa, then I think that definitely solidifies the fact it was the right decision. Anyway, let me know in the comments down below what you think. Drop a like on the video as well and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. All right, I'll see you in the next one.